You have to hit it, and then you have to hit it again, and now we're live. So another great intro. How are we doing, Isobuddies? This is Claire. That's Claire.
Hey. Claire, by new tree. Josh is over there. There. Josh is over there.
Right, we have a great show for you today, but first we want to talk about our non-sponsor and my brand new awesome thing that I put together today. We have Ophi's Spider-Verse. She sent us our first unsponsored item of a sticker. Honestly, I don't know what species it is. If you know, I would die to know what this is supposed to be. But yeah, she's awesome. If you don't know Ophi, she's 8 years old. She's super into arachnids, and her dad helps her with everything. But he's mostly just there for help. So if you're watching Ophi or Ophi's dad, shout out. But today our guest is Rus Wilson of Aquarimax, or as he has told us in Latin, it's Aquarius Maximus. If you haven't seen Russ's show before, he got me started more or less. Between him and Wally Kern, actually got me started into the hobby to answer all the questions via YouTube. And he's been in the hobby pretty much forever. Oh, we have Chris Biggs here. Okay. Perfect. So Rus is going to help us with our Latin today. He's going to help us talk about breeding projects.
Yes.
He's going to soothe my nerves with his melodious voice. He has this very soothing voice, and it's kind of like the Bob Ross of Isopods, I feel like. So we're going to bring him on. That's a great intro. I feel like we'll just bring him on.
Without further ado,
Without any more ado,
here's Rus Wilson.
Here's Rus. He's already laughing.
Hey, Rus. Thanks for joining us.
I enjoyed the intro, I must say.
Oh, good. Whew. I always roll the dice if I get too personal or too crazy with it. So welcome aboard, Rus. Thanks for joining us today.
I'm glad to be here.
I think I have the first question. We'll start off really quick. So when would you say did you first get serious about the hobby? And by the hobby, I guess we have a broad brush for microfauna, which is like anything you could keep in a small room. So okay. I know you got into fish, right? I did kind of a deep dive. So you were a fish guy first, right? Mostly.
Yeah, well,
totally.
Sort of. I mean, my social media presence was fish first, but actually I've been doing all of that stuff for almost ever. I mean, I started keeping critters when I was 4, officially. Before that, my mom found that when I was 18 months old, that I put worms in my pocket and tried to bring them home. So I was doing, into invertebrates and whatnot even before that. So I've kept all kinds of things for years and years and years. But I would say, as far as social media is concerned, I got a little more serious about it around 2016. But I've been breeding reptiles, fish, birds, mammals, and so on for many decades.
Fantastic. Show your multis. I don't know what that means. That's from Wally.
Oh.
I don't know what a multi is. I don't even know what that is.
That's my shell-dwelling cichlids.
Oh, those are so cool. I didn't know that was what they were called. All right.
Yeah, that's one of
or a slang term.
Yeah, kind of their nickname, because their scientific name is Neolamprologus multifasciatus. So multis for short.
Multi's way easier. All right. Perfect. Well, that's awesome to hear that you've been in it for decades, because it's not, to a lot of us, it's pretty new that this is even a thing as far as isopods are concerned.
Yeah. Well, isopods, maybe this will help put things into perspective, I guess. The first isopods I ever kept was in the mid-'80s. I collected some, kept and bred, not just, collected in a jar. I looked at them, which of course I did before that. But as far as keeping and breeding them, in the mid-'80s, I collected some aquatic isopods and put them into an aquarium and was breeding them. These are freshwater aquatic isopods I collected in an irrigation canal near my house. So that's how long I've been keeping isopods that you could say, I guess, were, they were intended as kind of a bioactive cleanup crew in there. So that
right. Was that their intention? Did you intend to have them as a cleanup crew at that point, or was it?
Yeah, that was when I first saw them. I said, "Oh, this is cool," and I thought, "Hey, if I keep these and breed them, they'll probably help serve as a cleanup crew in the aquarium. So yeah.
That's awesome. Okay, cool.
Awesome. Well, that also kind of covered the next question, which was who or what got you involved in the hobby.
And that was sort of a start, but of course, I didn't get into terrestrial isopods until much later.
Okay.
And that was I always struggle to figure out the year. It was around 8 or 9 years ago when I started keeping isopods, terrestrial isopods, in a bioactive situation. I attended kind of a seminar at a greenhouse where someone was demonstrating how to set up bioactive enclosure for dart frogs.
Okay.
Those were the people who did it back then. In the mid 90s was about the time when, somewhere in the 90s anyway, it was when dart froggers started keeping isopods in bioactive setups. At least that's as far as I've been able to trace it. It may go back a bit further, but as far as I've been able to trace it is into the mid 90s, somewhere in there. And so people were doing that in dart frog vivariums. And interestingly enough, not long after, hermit crab keepers were keeping isopods with their hermit crabs as a cleanup crew. And so I did all of the research I could find. It was all with dart frogs and hermit crabs at the time. So
hermit crabs.
Yeah, interestingly enough.
And so they would just eat them all,
and they do eat some of them, but they managed to breed and do fairly well in there. And so I guess that's how I got into it. And then so I met up with a dart frogger who lived fairly close to me and picked up several species of isopods. That's how I got started. I had like 4 species at that time.
What were the 4 species in the 90s? What did you have access to? Because I know it's just exploded in the last couple of years, but
it has. And this was after the 90s when I was getting into it, but I just trace it back to the 90s. But when I started, I picked up some Spanish orange. They called them giant orange at the time.
Right, because they were big, right? They were thinking they
were
were
like the biggest ones you could get. And then I got some dwarf whites and some dwarf purples and some striped or dwarf gray, or whatever you want to call it, Nagurus cristatus. Some people call them the dwarf striped or the dwarf gray or whatever.
So mostly the dwarfs. So you were into frogs at the time?
I was actually setting it up for geckos, but the same style of setup for mourning geckos, which I still have the descendants of now. And so yeah, that's how I got started. I later did get some dart frogs and have some, but that was the impetus that got me started, I guess.
Fantastic. That's such an organic way to get into it.
Yeah.
Now, how close? I guess you kind of answered this question already too. And how close to the origin of bioactivity were you? Were you like one of the front runners as far as spreading it out beyond frogs and crabs? I guess.
It's interesting. An interesting question. I'm not even sure, because I know I was interested in it before it exploded, and I know I was posting videos about it before it exploded, but I don't know how much of a role my videos played. Honestly, it's a little bit hard to trace.
In the community of people that I know, your videos are pretty massively influential as far as the 250 or so people on our channel, and then the rest on some of the other channels that I've met, or that I've been on. So your videos are pretty influential on the folks that have gotten into it in the last couple years. So I guess partly you could be one of the main front runners. That's pretty awesome.
I would say with isopods anymore, definitely. Honestly, Russ, I found a couple of your videos that helped me set up my first enclosures this time last year. And I still recommend your channel when other people are back where I was a year ago and looking to get started. So
awesome. Well, that's good to hear.
Oh, Wally says 98%. Wally Kern says 98% of what he learned is from you. The other 2% was making errors and correcting them, which is fair. That's fair. I would say it's 50-50 between you and Wally for me. All right, that's all I had for that one.
So do you have any special background related to the hobby, like training or education?
Yeah, I guess you could say that. I excuse me. I have both volunteered and worked at zoos, and worked with various creatures, including invertebrates. in that capacity. So yeah, I guess you could say that.
That's pretty good. And then do you speak Latin, or because you've got good pronunciation here as I can tell, but I don't really deal with Romance languages.
Well, I do speak Italian.
Okay.
Lived in Italy and lived with Italians here in the U.S. Speak Italian fluently. So since Italian is basically the one of the closest descendants of Latin, and it kind of works, but at the same time there are different variants of Latin depending on where you learn it, and so the pronunciation that I learn is going to be a little bit different from what someone does in the U.S. And so my pronunciation is a little bit more Italianized, and it's probably in many cases closer to what was actually said, but it's not going to be exactly the same than maybe what is considered like the classical Latin that's spoken and taught here in the U.S. Going to be a little bit different, but in general, it's probably pretty close.
Cool.
All right. So on that note, I'm going to jump in with just a tiny question on that Latin note. One of my favorite species all time is Armadillidium parachae. How do you say it?
Okay, I have to look at the spelling of that one again because I don't keep that species.
PERACCAE, I believe.
It's probably,
I know it's a double C.
Some people would say parakai, some people say paraki.
So I'm way off. I like the ch in there, but all right, I'll have to change that. Wally wants us to make you say mankai.
Okay, I usually say mankai, which goes with my Italianized pronunciation. The Latin word mancare means to be missing, and the term mankai comes from the fact that when an isopod emerges from the pouch, before it molts, it is missing a thoracic segment, and after it molts, it gains that thoracic segment. And it has the same number as an adult does.
In that first molt, right?
After the first molt. So prior to the first molt, it is missing something, and so it's called a manca.
Okay.
And so in the plural, in Latin, AE would be pronounced I. But a lot of people say monkey or whatever. It comes in all different flavors. But
I've heard Wally say monkey in his videos, so I don't know who he thinks he's teasing. But so how has the isopod hobby changed, like, since you started in terrestrial isopods?
Okay, since I started in terrestrial isopods, it's exploded in terms of both species that are available, in morphs within the species, and within popularity and purpose too has kind of shifted, because it was almost entirely just bioactivity, utilitarian kind of things with frogs and with hermit crabs mostly, and with a very, very limited set of species available. And I saw when Peter at Bugs in Cyberspace posted the first zebra pill bugs to really, start that rolling. And I looked at that and I thought, 4 of them for $18? Wow, those are expensive. I don't know if I'd ever spend that.
Those are rookie prices right there.
Yeah, and because they were so new, I mean, it totally made sense at the time for them to be more expensive. But of course, now you can get them for much, much cheaper. But very, very little was available at the time.
And now you can get like one of a species for $100. So
the prices and I've spent much more on individual isopods than I thought I ever would. When I bought rubber duckies and made a $200 purchase to buy a starter colony of rubber duckies, things like that. So yeah, I mean,
and that's not even anything new. And I started out with like, I'll never pay that much for bugs. Like, they're bugs. What are you, crazy? And now I'm like, oh, wife, I just need to put away $20 a week until this date. She's still not down. She doesn't understand.
Yeah, I think my wife has always been pretty tolerant of it, but once the isopods started actually bringing in extra money, then she was happy about it. Not just tolerant. She was like, oh, okay, this is good stuff.
Yeah. I bet that helps, right? When your hobbies start to pay for themselves.
Yes, definitely.
All
so
right.
what do you think is the most rewarding part of all of this?
Well, with a superlative like most rewarding, I can never pick one because there's so many nice, great rewarding aspects to this. I love interacting with people who share an interest in isopods and the other things, the other creatures, reptiles, what have you, that I am passionate about. I love that. I love the fact that we're here talking about isopods. That's in itself is great. It's awesome, and the internet has allowed us to come together and do that kind of thing. So I love that. I love the fact that isopods can add another dimension to a system when before bioactivity was really a thing. You could keep reptiles and you could make it look kind of natural, but it was kind of a mess that you had to clean up a lot. And with the bioactivity, now you can have what's not a replication of a perfect natural ecosystem. We can't replicate it exactly, but we can mimic it in certain key areas where we're lowering the maintenance, we're increasing the beauty and the biodiversity in our little setup, and that's just beautiful. That's a beautiful thing. And just the variety with isopods and the simplicity of taking care of isopods. Once you kind of get isopod husbandry down in general, then husbandry is variations on a theme. Basically, this one likes a little more humid and this one needs more space, and a few little tweaks, and you can keep all different kinds of isopods and enjoy the variety and just pop open those tubs and hey, look how they're doing, and you see they're just thriving, and that's really enjoyable. So I have like 5 different answers for that question, I guess.
Everyone does.
Everyone does.
Like, how do I pick
can't
one?
Be just one answer.
Yeah, talking to you guys was the best one, I think somebody said. I was like, shut up. No. Sorry. Getting a question. I'm trying to answer questions in the script too, or in the scrolling. It gets difficult. Okay, this is my favorite. Are there any, and I'm going to say this in quotes, top secret breeding projects that you want to share with us? Maybe something you just shared on your own channel, maybe. Because I think you've talked about breeding projects a couple different times. I'm going to put mine up now and try to change this around a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
So we have actual bugs. This is just, I started a breeding project with Punta Cana and T negative albino. And this is my first round of select babies. But I don't know. It could be something.
Can you put that in solo mode on the screen so we can just see it a little bigger, maybe?
Put it in solo mode? Yeah.
That'd be cool. Oh, I mean the bugs. I'm going to see.
Yeah, I'm trying. Let's see. There we go.
Here we go. Yeah.
So the one at the top, this one that's got the yellow, the high yellow.
Yeah.
That's kind of, you see it's darker in the front, and then he goes back down to, with my garbage lens, you can't tell, but it's more reddish at the hiney. And then on the face, it's this darkish. You can see the bandings even thin out as it goes back.
Yeah. Going there.
Yeah, and this guy running in underneath him is about the same. So I'm kind of going for that. But we'll see. I don't know that Punta Cana is the right one to start with because they have so much diversity.
There's a lot of diversity there.
Yeah.
But, yeah. I think it's definitely worth pursuing, seeing what you get in a couple generations here.
Definitely want to try it out. So, and follow whatever advice you have for us today on starting breeding projects.
Cool.
I was thinking of breeding for size as well, like different ones for size. But I don't know that you don't really know until they're full grown how big they're going to get. So
right. You don't, and they don't have like a terminal molt, and so they don't really have a maximum size so much as they just eventually die and stop growing.
Right.
And that's what stops them. So, yeah. Well, Oren chimed in on that about breeding for size because a lot of people are interested in that. And in his book Isopod Zoology, which I do recommend, I've probably recommended it a billion times, and I'll probably do it a billion more times. It's a great book. He mentions that breeding for size is really tough, partly because so many factors are going to influence the size, and by the time they're old enough to, select for size, if you can even do that, it's kind of too late. They've already had a ton of babies, and you don't know that it's necessarily even going to be a trait that's heritable. So,
they're already breeding.
Yeah. I have a gigantic zebra that I pulled out of a bioactive vivarium with my morning geckos that had been in there. I had just put it in there because it was a spotted one, and I was just kind of culling out some of the spotted ones and put some in there to be cleanup crew. And then I saw it there, and it was like 3 times bigger than anything I have in my bins. It was gigantic.
Wow.
And so I pulled it out just for fun and put it in just for comparison's sake. I don't think it's going to do anything as far as genetics, but it's still cool. It's fun to see how big they can get. And I think when you have, this particular isopod was not competing for resources with other isopods as much. And so it was able to divert more of its energy towards growth. And so I think there's some potential there. If we want to get big isopods, we may have to look more into husbandry and population density than selective breeding, perhaps.
That makes sense.
We were talking about that with our last guest. Sorry, go ahead.
Back to selective breeding. Josh had asked you about sharing any top secret breeding projects, so that we kind of got carried away.
Yes, I got that.
There she is. That's why Claire's so important to the show.
Well, here's a breeding project I guess I've been working on for a while, and I just posted a video on it, so we could talk about that. That kind of fits your question, I guess. I've been working on the night gold Armadillidium vulgare for a while. I collected. What was that?
That's what you're calling them?
Calling them night gold, and the reason I'm calling them that is because my son collected the founding member. He collected an almost solid yellow Armadillidium vulgare in the canyon near our house. It was like very close to solid yellow, and that's what because we were just hiking in the canyon one day and noticed, wow, the Armadillidium here have a higher incidence of yellow on their bodies. And so I started collecting some, and then I thought, I'm not going to be able to get them all the way down the hill alive. We've been up here, we're kind of high up here, and so I just released them and said it's just going to be better just to let them go. And then he found one like that, and I said, oh, never mind. Let's collect some of the higher yellow ones and bring them home along with this one. And we did manage to get them home just fine. We got creative, and so I decided to just try to line breed them, because it's not the yellow incidence on the yellow markings is not like a single gene recessive trait. You can't just breed it like you would a lot of other traits like Dalmatian or different things like that. So it has to be more of a line breeding where you just select individuals with higher patterning, and then it also appears to be sex linked, so it's a lot less common in males and a lot less pronounced in males even when it does appear. And so I've been playing with that for years and just calling out the lower expression individuals, and it's finally working. It's taken years to get anything that looks really impressive, but now we're getting individuals that approach that original specimen that's nearly solid yellow. So it's working. It's just taken forever because being a line bred trait, it's a lot harder to fix.
Okay. That's fantastic, because they were beautiful. The ones that you pulled out, even the culls, I was like, send them here. It's like I could use them. But I'd heard that the yellow spotting on the regular vulgares that I pull, I'm in Illinois, pulling the regular vulgares. I have some with some really nice markings, and they're pretty nice yellow spots. But I've heard that it's just the females that have it, basically. Yeah,
and it'll show up in some lines. Some lines the males have it, and if you breed for it long enough, you can usually get some of the males to show up with a lower incidence, but getting them to be as patterned, as high expression as the females is laborious unless you get some of those lines. I know that Kyle Candelian of Roach Crossing has at least one line where the males carry it pretty heavily, and I'm thinking about picking up some of those to work that into the line so that I could get both of them with the expression. I've been toying with that idea.
That would be great. That would be great to see once it's established and settled.
Yeah. Looks kind of like the ornatus, but an Armadillidium version of Porcelli ornatus.
Oh,
maybe high yellow. That'd be cool.
I'm an Armadillidium fanatic. Like, I love them. So that any new cool morph of those that I see is just great.
Oh yeah, I'm a fan too. It's always hard to pick, but I love Gestroy, for example.
Yeah, they're right here on my desk. Like, they're always right here next to me. Yeah, the Gestroy Punta Cana is probably my number 2. Well, it's hard to tell. Paracea, Parisia. I don't know how you want to say it. Whatever. You already coached us, and I still am off on another pronunciation.
Paracay, and then it's plural.
Yeah, I call them poor man's Cubaris because they're so common, and I just love their coloring. I'm trying to breed a blonde version of those. I have some that expressed like a blonde. I guess it's not yellow, but it's not the blue that they come in. So, yeah, trying to. I separated out about a dozen of those, and they're not too impressive. I'm wondering if it's something to do with food.
Yeah, could be. Yeah, that's a species I haven't played with yet. I need to because I do have a permit to receive that species, but
they breed like crazy. So
that's what I hear. Extremely prolific for an armadillidium. So
yeah. Okay, Claire, you're up.
Yeah. So when you're setting up a breeding project, what are some of the markers or markings that you're looking for in the original breeders and then in the offspring?
I guess it just depends on what I'm going for, but I think high expression of whatever the trait is. I mean, just try to find the highest expression because you're going to get a lot of variation. For example, with Dalmatian Porcellio scaber, you get so much variation where you get Dalmatians that are nearly pure white, and then you get some that are almost pied. They're so heavily marked in. And if you go for the high contrast, high expression, the more you go for that, the more likely, in many cases, you're going to get that in the offspring. And it does depend on which species you're working with and what the particular mutation is, because to contrast Porcellio scaber, where you have all that variation and it's very pronounced, but you generally, breeding for several generations of Dalmatians, you tend to get lower expression individuals, a lot of them, where they have got tiny little flecks on them that you can barely see without a microscope, or nothing, essentially nothing, or just one or two, like one little articulation of their antenna is marked, things like that. But with Porcellio laevis, with the dairy cows, you get some really, almost all of them have really great distribution markings and intensity of the markings. And occasionally you get like a white one that shows up, it's almost completely white or something like that. But most of the time, you've got some nice patterning, and that's just characteristic of that particular morph.
Yeah.
So it just depends on what you're working with. Like the Ukraine pied, which I'm really excited about working with, they have the coolest pied, like almost zebra stripes in their pied expression. So I'm excited to work with those. But once in a while, you get one that's almost pure white too. But it's rarer than it is in Dalmatians, for example.
Yeah.
Okay. That's fantastic. There's just so much in the hobby.
There is.
True.
Where are we?
And then speaking of like breeding projects, I know because I watched your video on the dairy cows with the orange laevis, and I actually have a bin with both of them in there because I was trying to separate out like a milkback almost working on my cows. And I figured you hadn't been successful, and I haven't heard of anybody being successful, but I'd put the milkback, my milk cows in with the orange and just see what happens.
Yeah, and I think
I think in your video you said you were expecting a generation or two of wild type before you started to get the potential results.
Yes,
if it had worked.
If it had worked, right. and that's what I saw exactly. I saw a bunch of wild types when I did that Porcellio scaber orange with the Porcellio scaber Dalmatian, and almost all of the next generation was wild type, and there were a few calicos in there, which was kind of funny, but showing that there are some other latent genes hanging around in there as well. But most of them were the wild types, and then crossing those, I got about 16% orange Dalmatians out of that.
That's really cool.
That's really cool.
And so that's what we would hope would have happened with the laevis, but there's some weird stuff going on there, and I think the taxonomy.
Yeah, there is. I'm having the same results that you are right now. I've got orange babies. I've got cow babies. I saw one baby that might have been orange and cow, but it might also have just been eating a carrot.
That does happen. That totally happens. And I've actually had a lot of people, this is interesting, I've had a large group of people, well, not large, but I guess a number of people have contacted me saying, I've done it. I've crossed them. Check this out. And what they will do is send me a picture of a laevis, or at least a dairy cow, that has the dark spots on it, and then there will be little tinges of orange in its antennae or around the edges of its carapace or something. But what's going on there is something completely different than the cross that we would expect. First of all, there's no generation of wild types in between, and Porcelia laevis does seem to some individuals, and I think it is linked with sex as well, seem to express some kind of orange tinges, and it may be they may be collecting carotenoids and expressing them in their coloration, something like that. But it's not a genetic trait that is going to what we would fully expect to see would be the gray markings replaced by the orange, and that's not what these pictures are. I have had people send me pictures of pied laevis with orange markings too, and there is someone I'm communicating with in Europe who has they're not orange dairy cows.
Right.
The trait is different. It's pied. It looks like a pied scaber, kind of. It's very large patches rather than what you see in a dairy cow of orange and white, and they're working on trying to isolate that. And they're still trying to determine if it's genetic or not, and at least heritable, because there are some, pied, like in Silisticus convexus, we had that pied that showed up here in the U.S. a few years ago, not heritable. So we're going to see whether or not it turns out that way. But there's some interesting things going on for sure.
Definitely.
I'm going to call that Orange Julius, and I'm going to trademark copyright on here. It's right here. It's time stamped forever. All right, Russ, this is the most fun for everyone, I think. So personally, I love it's encouraging to me to hear, as a beginner, to hear the pros failure stories. Like, I love the success stories. I think they're great. So could you give us an example of a failure or like one of your most notable successes that you've had in your career, I guess?
Okay.
In this career, the hobby.
Yeah. Well, some failures. My first foray into the Cubaris genus with rubber duckies. Like I think I mentioned before, I spent about $200. Split an order with someone. We both got about 10. I think it was 10 rubber duckies each in this order, and so it was like a $500 order with shipping and everything, something like that. And we split it, and it was great. The seller was great. He sent really great stock with the dark body color, and some of them were they were varying ages, including some pretty big ones that were mature and should have been breeding soon, and so on. So nothing wrong with what I got, right?
Okay.
It was all me. The rubber duckies did fine in terms of survival for months, but I wasn't seeing any reproduction at all.
Okay.
And I didn't know why, but they just were not reproducing. And so I wasn't too alarmed. I was just, okay, I'm going to do the patience thing. I'll just be patient with them. They're not dying. They're okay. We'll be good. Eventually, this is just going to pan out like it does with so many others. And then one day I looked in there, they're dying. I'm losing these rubber duckies. What am I going to do? And I contacted the original seller and I said, I'm losing them. I don't have very many left now. And so I talked to him about what I should do, and because he's had success breeding the rubber duckies, and we talked about putting them into a smaller container. So they were in a 6-quart sterilite tub for this 10 group of 10.
Okay.
And
pretty small.
So I put them in a tiny little 7-ounce container. And set
like a deli cup, basically. Yeah.
Yeah, it was one of the Superior Shipping Supplies little rectangular 7-ounce. Bins with the ventilation and everything. They come molded like that, and put them in there. And within a month or two, I saw babies. And it had been like a year that I had them before this without breeding.
Wow. So they could have been dying of old age at that point.
Yeah, they could have been dying of old age. They were big. They weren't, and it's hard to say what was going on, but that could have been it. But at any rate, put them in there, and they were breeding, and I saw babies. And so then I moved them up, and this time I moved them up to a slightly larger container. It was a tarantula cribs container. I love those. They're the coolest containers for isopods. because they're like high quality. The container looks cool, but also you can see the isopods from the outside. A feeding frenzy of Porcelia laevis through the side of one of those containers is awesome. But anyway, so I digress. I put them in one of those a little bit bigger. So this was probably 2 or 3, maybe 4 times the volume, something like that, or the footprint of that other container. Put them in there, breeding again. I had a ton more. And then recently I moved them out of there into a larger tarantula quibs enclosure, and I had like 50 of them.
Okay.
So it was a failure. I was down to about 3. Bought a couple more at an expo. I forgot to mention that. I got some from Nocturnal Exotics, Damien, Nocturnal Exotics. He's local to me, and so I picked some up at an expo to add, so I didn't have like such a tiny gene pool.
Yeah.
And now I probably have 70 now because they've just kept breeding. So, but definitely I failed with that initial attempt to breed them. One I completely failed with, so I wasn't able to save it and pull it out, of the garbage, was with my first group of magic potions.
Oh, wow. That would hurt.
Yes. I started out with 6 of them because, they were pretty expensive at the time. They're not super cheap now either, but I think they were a little more expensive then. Got them very small, raised them up all to adulthood, and they get pretty big, and
they do get good size Vulgaria. Yeah.
And they were all adults and just fine. And then one by one, very slowly, they just died off. And there was nothing, I couldn't figure out what was going on. And of course, then I got back into them, and now I have them breeding and everything's fine. But I didn't manage it that first time. The only thing that I can think of is this has happened to other people, that some lines of Magic Potion are male heavy. So I think with just 6, I probably just got males.
Wow. I've never heard that. I'm having the same problem with my clue guy. I might pick your brain later. I have had them for over 7 months. No, pretty much the whole time I've been in the hobby. So over 7 months, and gotten them from 3 different breeders, gotten new colonies from 3 different breeders, never had mankind.
Really?
Not once. Yeah, and they just start slowly dying off. So, but let's move on to successes. Let's hear some good news. Let's bring it out.
Okay. So let me think. One, and I gotta give a shout out to J-Man. He's one of my supporters on Patreon, and he actually did something really cool. He had sent from a breeder, but sent to me. He purchased it and had it sent to me. A colony of Porcelio expansus.
Oh, wow. Nice. Holy cow. That's a Patreon right there.
Yeah.
We need to start Patreon, Claire. Make a note.
It's on my list.
J-Man has been a great support to me for a long time. As soon as he showed up, he's supported me in many different ways. And so he sent me these Porcelio expansus, and I had about, I don't know, it was just a normal starter size colony of about 12 of them. And in the first little period when you're breaking things in, especially if you're starting out with pristine substrate, you sometimes have some die off. It's kind of a normal thing. And I did lose a couple of them. But pretty soon they were breeding, and they bred faster than any of the large Mediterranean Porcelio that I've ever had. These Porcelio expansus started breeding faster. Like
wow.
Porcelio Hoffmannseggi took longer. Porcelio ornatus took longer. I mean, everything took longer. These just started breeding. I was seeing Monkai almost immediately, and now there's tons in there of all different ages, and they're doing absolutely fantastic. So they're an expensive species, of course. They're a fantastic species. If people ask me what's the most impressive isopod I have, that's the one.
I just love their markings. They're just beautiful.
They are. And they remind people of trilobites. And of course, they're only very, very distantly related to trilobites, but they look so trilobite-ish that they're just.
They have that, yeah.
They have that look to them.
Aesthetic. They have that aesthetic, right?
That aesthetic, exactly. And
now, I thought that they were seasonal breeders. Is that true?
For me, some of the giant Porcelio have been. My Porcelio magnificus have been. Porcelio Hoffmannseggi to some extent. For me, for whatever reason, the Porcelio expansus don't seem to be as much. They're always of different ages in there ever since they started breeding. I've got really tiny Monkey almost all the time, and I've got mid-sized juveniles, large juveniles, and reproductives. So
We had a story here that one of our guys, one of our listeners, said that their expanses ate two. They ate two of each other. They destroyed each other, and now they are just having babies like crazy. Apparently, it's a success story.
That's interesting. I wonder what's going on there. I do know that the males do battle each other for mating privileges. You know, they actually have structures on their head, little bumps on their head, for the purpose of shoving matches, which is pretty cool.
That's awesome. like the beetles, like the giant beetles.
Like sheep, but with isopods.
Yeah. It's basically the same idea.
I would never stop watching them. Oh my god.
Yeah, it's pretty fantastic, and I think that's one of the attractions to that species too. They're just, what's not cool about them? There isn't anything that's not cool about Porcelia expansus.
Man.
And one thing too is that they are a protein eater. They're kind of shy, and sometimes we associate protein-hungry isopods with boldness, like dairy cows, for example. But Porcelia expansus are kind of shy, but they like their protein, and they're not really big leaf eaters. So you need to make sure they're getting their protein, even though they're not going to be real excited about it in the same way that a dairy cow would be.
So they kind of like, I've noticed my Hoffmans don't attack it that way either. I expected them to because of their size.
Right. But they're really kind of a shyer isopod.
Yeah, definitely. Awesome.
So one more on breeding projects. Do you have any successful breeding projects of your own yet? And we already touched on one. Yeah. And so that one we already touched on. Do you have any others? And do you think that you're at a point where any of these projects would be saleable or available in the near future?
Okay. Well, I have started letting go some of my night gold culls. I just sold off a bin of them, essentially, really fast. As soon as I put them up, people jumped on it and they were gone. And then I went through and culled it out a bunch again. So, well, not a bunch, but a few. So I've got a few out there. And then let's see, a couple more. Well, I did produce some orange Dalmatians a long time ago. That's kind of old news, but that was fun. Producing something using two morphs to create another morph. That was my first experience with that. So that was fun and a success. And so now any orange Dalmatians that are going out into the hobby from my stock are a mix of the original stock that Ryan Orr produced and my stock, which is kind of fun.
That's cool.
And then I'm working on something. I'm working on a lot of things. I'd have to go into my isopod room and like peek around and say, oh yeah, I'm working on that, right? But I'll tell you one that I thought of that is kind of fun. And I posted a little bit about this on Instagram, but I haven't actually, well, it might be in a live stream somewhere. I can't remember. But in my orange vigor, I started getting these really yellow isopods, like lemon yellow, showing up in my orange vigor bin. And so I started culling those out and separating the orange from the yellow. And I think I might get somebody suggested the name lemon drops for them. And I'm hoping that those will prove out, but I'm getting a lot of them showing up. A lot of the babies look like the adults now. So I'm still, pulling orange babies out too, but I think it's going to work. And their color is really fantastic. At first I was thinking they might be like T positive albino, but I don't think they are. They tend to have an orange head. Their head is orange. And then the rest of them is mostly yellow with the lighter yellow markings on it. Like it's two-tone yellow, but some of it's lemon yellow. It's pretty funky.
That's really interesting. If they still have the orange head, like that's almost like an Armadillium ducky.
Yeah, it kind of has that effect. So I'm hoping it'll prove out. That's
really cool.
It sounds successful so far. It'll be exciting to see.
Yeah. It's just too bad. Like the worst thing about Armadillium vulgare is that it takes a long time to breed. They produce a lot of babies, and I love them. I mean, they're one of my favorites. They're all my favorites. And what am I talking about? Except for dwarf whites, they're my not favorites. But
you and everyone else.
Yeah. I love them, but they take a long time to breed and a long time to grow up and start producing. That's why it's taken me so long to produce the night golds, like I was talking about.
I already said you some for my backyard collection. They're extremely prolific, and Depends on which bin they're in. Sometimes they grow out relatively quickly for Armadillidium too.
Interesting. And I've heard that there are lines like that. There are faster maturing lines and slower maturing lines. Like the magic potions tend to be slower maturing. They get big. They're not as prolific, but you get some lines that are just kind of crazy. So that's something that we need to try to work into maybe most of the morphs. Get that quick maturing gene, whatever's going on there, worked in.
Breed for that quick growth.
Yeah.
Just churn them out. Beautiful.
Like
my wild type bin that has some other genetics added to it, I've got all different sizes, all different ages. And then when I separated them out, I had a bunch of Monkey left over, so I've got a grow out bin of just from the backyard, and they're still super small, but they're thriving.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a ton of them in there.
Nice.
I probably could upgrade them again.
So do you have any pro tips for people like me who are relatively new, like for the beginners? Like I said, we got like 7 or 8 months in this. I think it was I guess it's getting to 10 months now. Last June is when I got into it.
Let's see. Pro tips.
Hashtag Supreme Isopods.
Yeah, Wally's always got great pro tips. That's true. I love that about his videos. He'll include a lot of them in there. I'm just trying to think, because without, I almost want a little more context. Like if you say in this area, what kind of pro tip do you have in this particular aspect of isopod care?
Okay. That's tough. But yeah, no, I don't really want like narrowing it down, but would you say like pro tips for your soil mixture, like as far as your ratios?
Okay. Well, one thing that I would like to say there is that I have seen so many different mixtures, and my mixture is based off of a mixture I learned about on arachnoboards.
Okay.
Mickey M is that's her YouTube handle, and she shared that, which was great on arachnoboards. And this was back in the old days, the prehistoric days of my isopod keeping. I used basically cocoa fiber as my base substrate and then put the leaf litter on top of it. Right.
Okay.
I got really good reproduction on that. I got good growth and everything because they were living on the leaf litter. They weren't really using the cocoa fiber so much as a source of nutrition, but still got really good, decent results. But when I switched the substrate and made it a richer substrate with the sawdust from like oak pellets, the oak smoker pellets, that kind of thing, and organic compost, I noticed an increase in reproduction. Like every bin became more prolific. But I don't think it's so much the specific mix, because I had to modify the mix that she gave because I wasn't able to get some of the items that she was able to source. For example, she used a leaf compost, which is really hard to get in my area, just leaf compost. I can get compost with leaves in it, but there's a lot of other things. I think it has to do with making sure there's a variety of safe ingredients in the substrate. The more variety you can get into that substrate.
Okay.
And you're mixing up layers, so you don't have just layers of the same things. The more you're mixing up those layers, and that allows, like Wally has mentioned, that allows the substrate to last longer. So I think that's part of it. Another pro tip I would suggest is that, and this is completely unrelated to substrate, but I would say ventilation. I have begun to rethink ventilation. I think as with a lot of other things with isopods, there's more than one way to have success. And
absolutely.
Definitely. And this is true with ventilation as well. And I have looked into a lot of different things with ventilation, and now a lot of my bins, even though for years I was covering the ventilation holes with chiffon or with breathable medical tape or different things, I've noticed that because I've been experimenting with this for a while now, and I haven't posted a lot about it because I wanted to let the experiment run long enough to see if it actually held true over time. But
this is an exclusive tip. This is an exclusive tip for Isobuddies Productions, folks. All right.
Is that it doesn't matter whether you cover the in the long run, it doesn't matter whether you cover the ventilation holes with something to keep fungus gnats out or not. You're going to end up with the same number of fungus gnats, depending on your husbandry. Your husbandry and your maintenance of the substrate is going to matter a lot more. Whether or not you have springtails in there, that kind of thing matters a lot more than whether or not you cover the vent holes.
Huh.
And
So
that doesn't hold true if you're talking about otherwise sealed containers. If your container will seal tightly and you have you have screened vents that is covered with a mesh that's fine enough to keep out fungus gnats, you can keep out fungus gnats as long as you keep the lids closed. I mean, I've tested that out and it works. You can keep fungus gnats out, but you leave that lid open once and you can get fungus gnats in there. But as long as you have your husbandry under control, otherwise, it's not going to matter in the long run. You may have an initial sort of bloom of fungus gnats, but it's not going to matter. Like I use the tarantula cribs enclosures, and I've been using them for a while. They have tons of ventilation, tons of vent holes that are open.
Yeah.
And yeah, like today, I was looking in there. I have milkbacks in one of the larger ones in there. I don't see fungus gnats messing around in there, and there's a ton of ventilation. I think actually the cross ventilation may actually help to inhibit fungus gnats by giving enough ventilation to inhibit some of the fungal growth. So if you have enough of it, and in the balance of ventilation, I'm just kind of rethinking all of this because I think, yes, I had tons of success doing ventilation the way I had always done it for years. And it'll work. It's a workable system. It's sustainable. There's nothing wrong with it. But just I'm rethinking, how I do it. And if you do smaller holes, but you do more cross ventilation, it seems to be beneficial in a lot of ways. Without you get plenty of ventilation and less top ventilation decreases the evaporation, and so you're doing less maintenance and less moistening, but you're still getting most of the benefits of ventilation. So there are a lot of things I'm looking into, still playing with it. But I'm starting to go back and just replace the bins so that I can change the ventilation on some of these.
Wow. Okay. So you're not noticing a difference with the mesh or not, unless it's totally airtight.
Unless it's totally airtight, besides the ventilation holes. Yeah.
Right.
Because like in a 6-quart Sterilite tub, which we all know and love the 6-quart Sterilite tubs, they're going to let the fungus gnats can get in anyway.
Yeah.
So whether the screen there is or not is immaterial as far as they're concerned. It does not matter.
I found that with mine. I have a couple where I actually cut out squares and covered them with fabric, and I have a few where I just poked holes and didn't cover them. And it's the same. I usually have a bloom of gnats towards the beginning, and once it's established and the springtails get in there, then I don't see nearly as many gnats.
Yeah.
And that's across all of my tubs, regardless of whether I've drilled or poked the holes with my embroidery scissors or actually cut out a hole and covered it.
Yep. And I am noticing some benefits to the smaller holes, like we talked about with the cross ventilation, and so you're getting the same kind of thing that I'm getting, and it may be something. I like having high holes along the sides with respect to cross ventilation because it keeps the isopods from crawling out. We have problems with powder blues. They can sometimes out of the bins. But if you have the holes high enough in your substrate, there's enough distance between those high holes in the substrate, and there's nothing for them to climb on if they get on that screen. If you have screen glued on, there are places where it's going to come loose and the isopods can get out. But if there is no screen and the holes are high enough they can't reach them, then you're going to reduce escapes too.
That's fantastic.
I found I only really have escapes if I let them go a little bit too long without checking, and then I've caught them crawling out of my Bulgari bin.
Mm-hmm.
And I've saved them to preserve because they didn't make it, but I did have some issues with my little C's, and I figured it out because I was overdue for checks, got them sorted, and they're not escaping anymore.
Yeah, that's a good point. And that's one thing that Wally's mentioning in the chat here too. A good pro tip is about foods and feeding, and how people are often overeager to feed their new colonies too much. Yeah. And that leads to things like mites, and it leads to mold and stuff like that. Because in reality, a new colony needs next to nothing, since it already has all the leaf litter and everything, all the substrates there. You could probably leave that colony alone for 3 months and just make sure it's hydrated, and it'll be fine. and not need to eat. And a lot of people are just overdoing the food, and so they get problems with mold, and they get problems with mites, and that's another one to think about.
I definitely did that in the beginning. The big fuzzy ball of it was horrible.
Portion control is hard. Like even just trying to get it small enough sometimes for some of my smaller colonies.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so finding foods that they can eat that don't mold as readily is helpful. And just the idea about placing foods like that on top of a surface that's not going to, mold as readily, such as a magnolia leaf or a piece of cork bark or whatever it is. That's the thing a lot of people in the beginning don't think about. They're just like, oh, I'm feeding my isopods. I throw it in and it lands on a wet spot on the moss and molds overnight instead of.
Yeah, no. I try and keep my food. My containers probably tend to run a little dry, especially this time of year. I'm in the high desert.
Mm-hmm.
But I try and feed them towards the dry end, not completely on the dry end because then they never eat it, but not in the moss or in the wet parts.
Yeah.
Sorry, putting these guys back.
All
They've
right.
had no stress.
So the penultimate question. We've been talking a lot about isopods, but I know you have a lot of other really awesome invertebrates. Like I watched one of your unboxing videos with some of the beetles you have.
Oh, yeah.
So could you compare and contrast the ease of the keeping requirements for some of the other invertebrates?
Sure. Yeah. I think there are a lot of invertebrates that are comparable to isopods in care. Millipedes being one that just pops right to mind. Their care is virtually identical. Basically, you're looking at almost the same thing, but with deeper enclosures so that you can give them deeper substrate. The millipedes tend to, decaying wood is good for isopods, no doubt about it. But millipedes need it where you can get isopods to breed with just the leaf litter. And most of the millipedes need the wood as well. Mm-hmm. And isopods do better with it, but there's a slight difference there. The depth of substrate they need to be able to molt effectively. Isopods don't need that as much. Some depth of substrate is beneficial, but not, the length of the millipede is what you're looking for the depth of substrate. Yeah. Other than that, they're pretty similar in care. And so I've been keeping millipedes for a while now too, and breeding several species. Some other things, I have a tailless whip scorpion.
Those are cool.
Which is very cool, and they're fantastic. And some species can be kept communally like isopods, but the species I keep can't really be kept communally. You put them together to breed, and the female takes care of the babies for a while, but other than that, you have to keep them separate. And of course, they're predatory exclusively, so that's a little bit more difficult to do. Although you can keep isopods with them, which is kind of cool too. The blue death feigning beetles that I've been working on.
Those are so cool.
I really like those a lot, and they are kind of like isopods in a lot of ways in that they can be communal, and they're interesting to watch. They're more active at night, like isopods, most isopods. So in many ways, they're similar to isopods. They're a lot harder to breed. They're working on it. I've only produced a couple of adults from egg to adult. It's not the easiest thing in the world, but we're getting there. We're improving or increasing the incidence of captive breeding in the hobby with things like that. So that's something that I enjoy about them. The challenge is fun, but one thing I really love about isopods is that if you can keep them, you can breed them.
Yeah.
There's nothing different in the husbandry you need to worry about, unlike some of these other invertebrates.
That's really cool. So do you have any other invert in addition to isopods, or maybe even some of your favorite isopods for absolute complete newbies or beginners who want to start branching out?
So either other invertebrates or isopods that I would suggest?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Well, if people are already into isopods and want to get into another invertebrate, some of the easier millipedes is a good direction to go. Like ivory millipedes, fantastic patterns, fairly easy to keep, can be bred in captivity fairly readily. If they can provide, temperatures above 72 Fahrenheit, bumblebee millipedes are another great one to go with. Mm-hmm. Fantastic coloration. Again, easy to breed in captivity. Those are a couple of ideas there. The beetles, Some of the desert beetles are fun for people who do isopods. I've actually seen people who have put together enclosures with Armadillidium vulgare and blue death feigning beetles, in which they're producing larvae of the blue death feigning beetles. So it can be done. You have to be careful to provide a good moisture gradient, but it can be done. So there are those are a couple of options, I would say. And as far as good isopods for beginners that maybe they haven't tried yet, if they haven't done Porcellonides pruinosus, that's a great species. Right next to me, so close I can actually touch the vivarium. My right hand is touching it right now. Is a leopard gecko with a bioactive cleanup crew composed of various morphs of Porcellonides pruinosus. They are so resilient. They're fast enough that the leopard, and small enough the leopard gecko doesn't eat them, but they're also really active, and there's so much color in there. When I lift up a piece of cork bark, you see this little rainbow. It's like living Skittles zipping around. And because I've got powder orange, I've got whiteouts, I've got Oreo crumbles in there, and I've got the wild types. And eventually they're probably going to produce some orange crumbles too, just based on the genetics in there. Yeah. And who knows what else. That species is one of the coolest for beginners if they want variety and activity. And it's not maybe one of the ones they think of immediately. Like dairy cows and zebras are, Armadillidium vulgare. Those are all excellent for beginners, but they might not think of Porcellonides pruinosus as much. But one thing that really sells me on them as an isopod with activity is just, you can look in broad daylight, they'll be out running around doing their thing as long as their population's high enough. I went to an insectarium not too long ago that had this incredible enclosure with it was a large acrylic enclosure with LED light just blazing down to grow these flowering plants. So that bumblebees, they had a bumblebee colony that was, pollinating and collecting nectar from all these flowering plants in the vivarium. And the LED lights had to be strong enough to keep these blooms going. And there were powdered oranges shamelessly zipping around in the daytime. They really don't care about the light. So you get a species like that. If something you want to use it as a display isopod that's super active, and that's another great one to do besides things like dairy cows or milkbacks.
And they have the color variation, like so many different variations of them too.
Yeah, I really enjoy the morph mixes, the lottery mixes, gem mixes, that kind of stuff. Whatever you call it, there's a ton of names depending on which species. I love them, and they're not that hard to create, and they're not very expensive, but they're a lot of bang for the buck for beginners especially, because you see the variety. A lot of people have purchased like the lottery mix Porcellio scaber from me because they want variety without difficulty, and you don't have the issue of species out competing other species, but you just get this kaleidoscope of colors.
Yeah,
that's so fun. And it's just a smaller enclosure too. It's awesome.
Yeah.
We're gonna open it up for a little bit for Q&A. Does anybody have any questions off of the YouTubes? I know we had some earlier. Let's see. Let me scroll up.
See if we can pull any. Well, while we're waiting and looking for questions, Rus, what about some intermediate isopods for some people who've maybe been doing it for a little bit and maybe want to invest more or want to try a species that's a little bit more challenging?
Well, I saw Wally suggested one in the chat, and I totally agree with him. Porcellio ornatus yellow dot.
Yeah.
It's a great one to get your feet wet with the larger Porcellio, Mediterranean Porcellio, because it is a little bit picky about moisture gradients. It wants some bone dry spots. It wants them, and it needs a moist area. But if you give it that and some decent ventilation, you're going to get a super active isopod that will take food from your fingers and will climb up onto your hands if you stick your hands in there. This kind of thing. Super active, not afraid at all, doesn't care about light. So there you go.
I'm going to have to put that one on my list now and train it like a puppy.
I have to keep them with the skinks I was talking about earlier. Here's a question we had from Permian Exotics earlier. Like, how did you get involved with Opa Ula?
Oh, yeah. Opa Ula are a Hawaiian type of shrimp. To just give you the quick rundown.
Oh, that's right. I just saw your video. Sorry. Go ahead.
No, that's cool. These shrimp, for those of you who are not familiar with them, are this amazing shrimp that lives in underground caves with brackish water in them in Hawaii. It's the only place it can be found on Earth, is these caves and pools where freshwater and seawater meet and mix. And so they can survive a wide variety of salinities, and they live underground for so long they can survive years without food, which is bizarre. And I got into them because I lived in Hawaii for 3 years.
Okay.
And became fascinated with them, and encountered someone who had a pond on their property with these shrimp in it. And I ended up bringing some back with me, and I've been breeding them for, since like 2008 or something like that.
Okay.
And they're fantastic because they are literally, I would have to say, the easiest pet ever. You can leave them alone for years and find that they've been breeding.
Just leave them alone for years.
Yeah, there was a biologist in Hawaii who collected, I think, 6 of them, put them in a gallon jar, and put a little glass lid over the top so it wasn't like sealed, so a little gas exchange could occur, but it would reduce evaporation. And I believe it was 22 years later, he had not done a thing, and he had more shrimp than he'd started with.
22 years later. All right.
Wow.
Yeah.
No filtration, no nothing. Just
nothing. Just the only thing that was getting in and out were gases and light. That's it. So
it's worth a shot. I've got some of those jars laying around.
Yeah. And they are seriously so easy. During quarantine, I had a tank in my office, and I couldn't go into my office, and so I was able to get into there twice in 5 months during quarantine. Shrimp were totally fine. I fed them those 2 times in the 5 months, and they were doing well. Not a problem.
They're like, thanks, but we don't need that.
We do have a couple other questions that just came up in chat, Josh. Maybe we should.
Yep.
Here we go.
I want to know your top three isopods. Lock it up, Russ.
Okay. Well,
I think I know one. I'm not gonna say it, but I'm gonna.
Okay. Well, in the Armadillidium genus, I'm going to say Gestroy. Love that species. They're big. They're beautiful. They're not that tough to keep. They take a while to breed, but it's worth it. So there you go. That's my top Armadillidium, I guess. Top Porcellio expansus.
That was it. All right. Nailed it.
Yeah, love that one. And then if I had to pick something that's not from either of those 2 genera, I'd probably say, and this is hard for me because I could easily give you 7 from each genus and still not be satisfied that I'm covering all the ones I love. But I'm going to say Porcellionides pruinosus, just for the reasons we talked about already.
Wow. All right. That's big. They're going to be selling out. Every breeder that's on this page right now. For our 12 viewers, they're going to be buying them like crazy this week. Blah 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 blah. Let's see. Do you missed over the top for the Viv? What's the most over the top idea for an Opa Ula vivarium? Do you have over the top ideas for them, or do you keep them kind of simple?
Josh, I think it's 2 questions.
It's 2 questions.
It looks like because
it's a repeat of the Opa Ula question, and then what's your most over the top idea for a vivarium?
Okay, my son and I have been talking about this for years. We want to make a vivarium the size of a room that looks like, that has living plants and animals in it, but either keeping plants that are actually, plants and animals that look like they're from the Carboniferous period.
Okay.
Either because they actually existed, something similar existed at the time, or they just look like something that did. Mm-hmm. And having a whole ecosystem going like that.
That would be really cool. That would be really cool.
My son's studying to become a paleontologist, so that's where that comes in with the Carboniferous. But we've been talking about it for years. It would be really cool.
That would be the size of a room. How many more viewers do you need to fund that? What do you need on our page?
Well, all I need is for all of my subscribers to become a patron for $1 a month, and then I could do it.
Ooh. Oh, that's a lot. That's crazy. I did just sub. So do you mist your isopods or add water down the side?
I almost always add water down the side. The only time I ever mist is when I have a stray bottle handy and I don't have a container that allows me to trickle. I usually use the ketchup bottle style squirter in there.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Or I'll take like a quart honey jar that I can use to just kind of squirt. That's almost always what I do. But if I don't have one handy and I need to mist just because I realize, oh, this one's getting a little dry, I'll grab it. And you do that, but I prefer to trickle.
Okay, that makes sense. What is the purpose of that for those of us that don't know?
Well, for Armadillidium klugi, for example, okay,
Sure.
they tend to respond very poorly to being misted.
Okay.
They will often die off if they get misted regularly, and don't tend to breed very well because they don't like the humidity spike. That well, it's hard to say if they don't like the humidity spike or there's something else going on. I'm not sure. They don't like it.
I think we just found out my problem. It might be if that's them, because yeah.
Okay, but if you trickle into their mossy spot right along the side of the bin and just let it kind of drip down into the moss, they tend to do a lot better. They breed a lot more effectively, and they're just happier. So yeah,
I will start doing that today, literally, and I will let you know right away. I'm not going to guarantee you'll be the first to know, but it'll be up there.
Awesome. I think Wally mentioned that in a video quite a while ago, and he had the same experience with his Kalugai that I did. This exact same thing.
How do you keep yours? Because he keeps his bone dry, and I've heard other people keep theirs very damp.
Mm-hmm.
And I've heard a mix, so I keep them about half and half, like 50-50.
Yep, mine is probably more like 1/5 moist moss, and the rest is bone dry.
Okay.
And I keep a piece of cork bark on the dry side, and I keep a piece of cork bark that abuts the wet side. And they love the piece of cork bark that abuts the wet side.
Yep.
So it's mostly dry under there, but there's a little edge that's touching in the wet area, and they love that. They've been breeding nonstop since then.
Fantastic. And Wally wants to know what's the weirdest food you've ever fed your isopods.
I love that question, and I'm sure there's something absolutely breathtakingly bizarre that I fed to them. I just got to think about it. Well, I'll just tell you the first thing that comes to my mind that's probably slightly weird. I have this kind of moth that has gotten into some of my isopod enclosures, Pyralis farinalis. It is called the meal moth, and it thrives in detritus.
Okay.
And somehow I got some in there, and so they'll breed in there, and they're really annoying. They're not as bad as fungus gnats, but they can be annoying. And I have discovered isopods love to eat them as long as they're dead.
Oh.
So if I find one in the bin, I will dispatch it, toss it in there, and they'll munch it up.
Perfect. I like the smack for effects. Smash. What did Wally say about his zebras? I think that's it. Do we have any more questions for our wonderful guest, Russ? Sorry, went a little over an hour, Russ. I apologize. We forgot to ask you what your getting the heck out of here time was.
That's okay. I think we're doing all right.
Great.
Everybody good?
It looks like we might be good.
Oh my gosh. Well, thanks again so much for coming.
Thank you, guys.
Absolute treat. We'll be on Facebook doing a chat room in Isobuddies, which I think you remember. If you want to join us afterwards, if not, that's totally fine. You may have had enough of us already. So,
no, I'd definitely like to talk to you all again. It's been fun.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you.
Oh,
Thank you very much.
We're honored.
Oh, I did it. Oh. I've been stressing out about this interview for like 2 weeks, for 2 weeks straight. So good. I'm glad you had a good time.
You guys were great. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you. It was nice to have the balance of both of you and the insights that you brought in, the questions you brought in. It was great. So
Thank you.
Thank you.
We
All right.
really
Well, thanks for coming. We will do our closing, and hopefully we'll see you in chat. All right. All right, Russ. Thanks again. It's awesome.
Bye, thank you.
What a great show.
Yeah, that was an honor. Russ, oh my God, and we're still a new show.
Episode 8.
Yep.
It was going to be called The Russening, and I stopped. I didn't want to make that a thing. I had it on my title, and I was like, Aquarius Maximus. I like that a little bit more.
Aquarius Maximus, I like.
To honor the Latin.
I do the scripts, but if there's a title for the show, that's all Josh.
I did the title, the description. I try to remember links. I think I had Aquarimax on there. Yeah, I did. I did put Aquarimax in the description of the video. So go visit his page. It's awesome. and keep coming back here. If you haven't liked and subscribed already, please do that. Click the bell icon, just in case we're not here on a Tuesday. There's only one more of those coming up, I think, before October. We're booked out till October. So there's one more of those. That's going to be on. We're going to be there live.
Josh is going to be on site, and it's going to be amazing. That's sometime next month.
It is next month. That's my man.
That is next month. However, next week, back on our normal night on Tuesday, we will have Mr. Nolan Webb with us.
Nolan Webb.
We will be talking ants and entomology.
If we're lucky, we may have some video of he and I collecting ants in the wild, because we might go out and do that this coming week because I'm still on lockdown. So if you want, join us there. Either way, Tuesday, come and have a good time. Thanks for viewing. Thanks for all your questions. It was a great audience today and a great guest. So it just panned out perfect night tonight, guys.
This show keeps getting better and better, and a lot of that is you guys and your questions and your comments. So keep it up. Keep coming back.
Keep coming back, please. So we love having the questions. We love having the teasing. Keep it family friendly. We're going to have Ophi on live at some point. So an 8-year-old child. So let's keep it nice, boys. All right, that's it, guys. And next week, join us for Nolan and ants. We're going to talk about all kinds of local Illinois ants. Maybe some more. He's going to be an entomologist. I think we said that. All right, my nerves are back. Talk to you later, guys.
Have a good night, everyone. See you either in the chat or next week.
Hopefully we'll see you in chat.